I'm Clint, and it's all about art theory and Photoshop techniques as we look at how to transition your digital painting from black and white to color in this episode of Swatches. Here's the image that sparked some of the interest. That's the Lady Paradoxia that I created for Legend of the Cryptids game. Okay, so we've got a couple of layers over here. I've got the extra layer up here set to color, which I'll be adding the colors on. My lines, my background, I have a little background glow to brighten the background around her, and of course all the gray tones that I added. It was like this initially with just the lines. I painted the grays underneath them. The lines are set to multiply in order to show up over the background easier. Now, there's a couple of ways to add colors. Of course, I could just paint the colors in, but I wanted to be able to focus on the values, how light and dark things are before I went into colors. And I chose to use a colors layer. You can use overlay. I'll go into the differences here in just a second. And I'm going to assume that you don't know much about Photoshop and explain a couple of things. Okay, let me pick a color here, just as if I was going to be doing this for real. Now normally I would not have things arranged like this on my screen, but I've crunched everything down to make it smaller for the recording. Okay, so I've just picked a basic flesh tone and I'll paint over her face here. Now anything on this color layer is going to adjust the chroma and the saturation of everything underneath it, but it will not affect the value, how light or dark things are underneath it. So how dark and light is strictly being controlled by the gray layer, and the color is being strictly controlled by the color layer. Now on this layer, I'm not going to be doing a lot of detailing. There's only so much that a color layer can really do. I'm using it to block in the basic tones of the area. I'm just putting in the base color. Anything beyond that is going to be hand painted later. I'll pull up another image here in a second showing you a later progression of what that looks like. But at this point, I'm just wanting to put in the base tones. Now in this case, like on the background, I do want to put some variation in. I want it to go, I don't want it to be all the same orange the whole way, so I'll probably put like more red or violet along the edge and let it go more yellow, pick more of a yellow tone as it goes in next to her, just to keep a graduation of colors. Now of course, you can hit the Alt key to default from the brush tool to the eyedropper tool without actually having to click on the eyedropper tool then back to the brush. So down Alt key. Now if I click this, it's not going to select the color on that layer. It's going to select the actual color that I'm seeing. And if I say select this orange, if I want to continue painting over here, I select this orange and then start painting that orange. Oh, maybe I do have it set that way. I want to set the eyedropper tool to current layer so that I'm grabbing what's on that layer to continue adjusting the colors and not what I visually see. Okay, so that's going to just adjust the colors. If I were to have done this on overlay, let's switch it over to overlay. Overlay is similar to color, but not quite the same. Overlay is kind of like a combination between color and hard light, in that it will adjust the colors underneath it like a color layer does, but it also multiplies the values together. It adds the values together. So if this layer is light, then it adds the light into each other to brighten it. If the overlay color is darker, then it adds the darkness to what's underneath it. If it's darker than the colors underneath it, it will add the darknesses together. If it's lighter than the things underneath it, it will add the lighters together. But if it's the same value or the same darkness, then the value will end up being the same. That is the best way that I can think to really explain it. And that is usually why I don't use an overlay layer. It's a little more complicated. It's a little more finicky about how light or dark something needs to be in order to do it and get to the tone that you really need. I do believe I ended up using an overlay layer when I was doing this section down here on the dress, because I couldn't quite get the vibrancy that I wanted through the color layer. Overlay layer will adjust the colors a little more depending on the value, and it can give some nice chroma to it, but it is more finicky about how light or dark the color is that you're using and how that affects the colors underneath it. So there we go. That's just adding the color. Let me pull up another file. Now at this point I would go over the whole image and then I would block in each one in a basic one tone for the area so that I can keep painting. Now I'll pull on a later version of the image and see if I can tweak it down to the size I actually need here for the video. There. So we've got a similar setup, but what has happened here, I'll run through some of this with you, show you what I've got. After I blocked in all the colors over the grays, I ended up like this. Now I've got all the other layers of lines turned off, just so you can see what it looks like without them. And then I combine the two. I merge the two layers together, the colors layer and the grays layer. So this is the combination of the grays and the colors. I still have the lines layer on their own layer right above the base colors now. Now, I'm trying to get the lines out. I don't really want outlines on all the elements of my image. I want a more realistic version without lines. It's just what I'm going for with this image. It's not right or wrong to have lines in the image. It's just not the style I was going for. Okay, so I've done a couple of things in order to get rid of the lines as I progress the painting. One of them is I'm reducing the opacity of the layer that they're actually on. So they are still on the multiply layer, so they show up over the paints underneath them. I've lowered the opacity from 100% to 77, so they are just a bit lighter. Now, so if I brought that all the way up, darkens up the lines a bit. So I'll drop it back down to about 77. And this is something that I use quite a lot, which is the mask. So let me delete the mask and reapply it and kind of show you what I'm doing with that. So masking used to be a pain years ago to do with Photoshop, but they've made it super simple nowadays. You just select the layer that you want. You go to this right here. This is the mask. Adds a layer mask. By default, the layer mask will be all white, which means anything that is white on the layer mask will show through. Anything that you paint black on the layer mask will be made invisible on that layer. For instance, I'm on the brush tool, black, and I have not this paint layer, but I have the layer mask selected. Now anything that I paint black on the layer mask will start to become invisible, such as, I'm looking down here, I know that I don't want a black edge on the edge of this dressy fabric. So I can paint that black, and as I do that, the line will begin to disappear. There we go. So maybe later I get sloppy with my paint and I want to know where that edge is again. And it's a good thing I didn't erase it. If I erase it, then it's just gone. But with the layer mask, all I have to do is switch back to white, which you can just hit the X key and it'll flip these two. And you can paint it back in and say, oh, well, there it is. Okay, well, that's all I needed to know. So as I'm going, I can decide which lines I need as guides and which lines I don't. So I can go around and be like, okay, you know what? I really don't need those very dark in a couple of different ways. Like back here on the hair, I don't want dark lines in the hair. It's going to be light hair. So I can just continue painting out. Now, I'm not fully painting them out at this point. I'm not totally erasing them. I still want a little guideline. But if I adjust the opacity of the entire layer, maybe I want some of the lines to show up a little bit better in one place because I really haven't got to painting that area and I need the guides. But in other areas, I really don't need them. That's why the mask is so handy. It allows you to manually control what areas you want still visible or not. So, I'm going to go back here, delete layer mask. Okay. I've got the mask back to where it was earlier. After I do that, and I've established my base colors, I've lined up some of my initial lines as guides, I create a normal layer. Okay, normal layer, just normal paint layer, on top of everybody else. I usually name it either main or norm. And I do use the naming conventions over here quite a bit just so I can work a bit faster. Now on this normal layer, I'm going back and doing all my main painting. Thus the name. Okay, so let me pull in a bit closer. You can kind of see what's going on here. So on this area, this is where all the real stuff's going on. I'm just using normal paints over top everybody else. I can turn off these other ones. You can see what's actually on this layer. There it is. It's just the stuff that I've hand painted. I did have to adjust, I think, the size of the entire head just a little bit, so I ended up copying and pasting the entire head. That's why that's all visible. Okay. And to keep from having to paint everything by hand and having to handle all the colors and all the values at the same time, that's why I've created this. The colors and the grayscale together is just so I don't have to do everything at one time on this layer. So now that I get to this layer, I can just go piece by piece. In this instance, I usually start with the head because it's going to be the center of the attention. And if it doesn't hold up well, then it's really not worth moving on until it works. So I've started most of my detailing work trying to figure out exactly the sort of look that I'm wanting for the metal, doing a bit of detail around the eyes and the skin, figuring out the skin tones, and then I just move from piece to piece, finishing as I go along. And in fact, I created a second layer just for more refining there on the face. I have saved a second layer of the drawing, one without the layer mask, on top of everybody so that I can just flip it on and off real quick and check my drawing to make sure everything is still in line. And this was just a helpful little layer. It's not really on the topic, but this is a normal layer at 56% opacity. Essentially, it is a selection layer. Here, let me select it. I could select it, go up to save selection. What I want to do is I wanted to select the main, be able to select the main character separate from the background, so I don't have to worry about painting off into the background all the time. So I created this selection. You can go to save selection, name it whatever you want, and then later, if you want to make that get that selection back, you just go to selection, load selection, and it'll bring it up. Well, I don't like having to go to selection, load selection, pull down the menu, select which one I want, and say OK. It's just hassle. It's just the hassle of having to do it. So once I made my selection, I made a new layer. I'll just do it again. Usually it's like red or yellow or something really bright. And I fill that whole layer with that color. And then I drop down the opacity a little bit just so I can make sure that the selection came out okay and it matches up. Okay, and then I keep it hidden. That way, if I want to select this character, all I really need to do is I hold down the Command key or the Control key if you're working with a Windows PC. And just hold down the Control key and click the image of that layer on the layer palette. Do not click its name, do not click the eye, you're clicking the thumbnail. If you hit the Command or Control key while you're clicking that thumbnail, it will select anything in that area. And the only thing in that area is that solid shape and the shape of the person. Now, that is much faster than having to go through select, blah, 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 pull down window, load selection. All I need to do is hold down Control key, select that, there I have the character. I don't always do that, but in this case, it was good for workflow to go ahead and take a minute, set it up, and then not have to worry about painting out of my edges the whole time. And you can do that. You can start subdividing that. So I made this other one, which is basically, various pieces of the metal. So if I wanted to paint just the metal tones without having to run into other stuff, I could select this one and of course turn it off. Usually it's not even on. You don't even have to have the layer on in order to do a selection like that. And then come back here down to the norm layer. I'm going to hide the selection, Control H, I'm going to hide it, I'm not going to deselect it. And then I'll just pick a weird color so that you can actually see what's going on. And it's only going to be selecting and painting in that area that I selected from that layer. Okay, so let me go over, one point I meant to go over. Somebody asked me a question about this, and it's an excellent topic. You don't hear about it much, but it's a problem you can run into when you're doing things along this line. Okay, let me run in here and answer this quick topic. Okay, I'm going to flip this back to color. Okay, there we go. And a couple of things. Guy said, when I add color, my lights end up being really cold and they don't come out as vibrant or as saturated as the ones I see in your image. Well, that can happen for a particular reason. It's an odd little problem that artists run into, and that is, let me make a quick layer on top of that so I can paint an example. Okay, white, straight black. Temperature-wise, they are very cold colors. You could say that white is almost the coldest color. There are cold colors in that blue is cold, some violets are cold, some greens are cold. These are all cold colors. Of course, you have your oranges and your yellows and your reds, and those will all be warm colors. Some violets are warm depending on what colors they're around. Okay, white and black belong with the cold colors. Okay, now the problem is white and black are always going to be cold. And here, let me delete all that. And do this. Say down on this gray layer, I decide, this lady's going to have white hair. Okay, I'm going to hit D, default, which makes my palette default to black and white. Just hit D and you get black and white. Okay, say this lady's going to have white hair. Fine, okay, here we go. Painting white. What? Give me a sharper one. Da, da, da. She has some shadowing as it goes away from us. Excellent. Okay. Then I say, all right, but actually she's going to be lit with she's going to have a warm light on her. But yet the problem is the hair still looks cold. Some of this edge area looks warm, but the hair itself is still cold. So people run into this problem. I forgot the gentleman's name that asked me this online, but I think this is the problem he's running into. And that is because white cannot be adjusted. White and black cannot be adjusted with a color layer. That is because there is no room for chroma. Here. Chroma is anything with color. It is the color of a color. It is not the value of a color. It is what particular color it is. It is an orange chroma, a lot of chroma. Now, white is all 0, 0, 0, 0, right? And there is no room for chroma in that, or in this case RGB, it's 255 all the way. The darker you get, the more chroma you can have. So moving along the scale, you get to the midtone. Midtone is where you're always going to be able to have the most vibrant colors. So if you want the most brilliant orange possible, it's going to be a mid-tone orange. Now, it increases the available chroma as you go darker until you get to middle, in which case you start decreasing the amount of chroma. Because at that point, you're diluting the color with black in order to make it darker. At mid-tone, if you start going lighter, you're removing chroma in order to get it closer to white. By the time you get to white, there is no chroma left to tint. So, in order to have nice warm lights and highlights going through this process, you have to keep your lights and whites away from actual pure white. Okay? White is the cherry on the top, all right? You have to start being really careful with your values so that you don't rely on using white very often. Let me pull up a later version of this image. Here we are. I'll pull him over in the middle here. Oh, yeah, that'll work. Okay. Now, I'll use the eyedropper tool here. Now, I started running into that back here. The problem started coming up back here because the background had to be very light in order for her to stand out real well. But I was running out of available value range to carry in a chroma. This is pure white. You can look over here and see that. But from some of the rest of this, like her hair, it actually has some value. It's a little ways from white. And certainly on the skin, you pull it nice and tight, like the quote-unquote highlighted areas in her skin have that much distance from actual white because I still need color in there. If I were to go much lighter, the color would start becoming cold because closer to the white you get, no matter what color you're getting lighter, any color close to white is going to get colder. Any color getting close to black is going to get colder. So just keep that in mind. And like around here, got to keep some tone in there to keep it warmer. Okay. No, that was the end result. Let me flip back to this one and turn that off. So you see here, I've tried to leave myself value range up next to white so that I wouldn't be running into that problem. Eyedropper. So like in the background, even though I know that this is going to be lighter and like parts of the skin, like on the shoulders, is going to be catching some light. Look at that. There's a big difference. Here, I'll paint it onto another layer. This is the shoulder is what you might consider a light on the skin, but it is actually nowhere near white. Look at the contrast between the light skin and actual white. And, you know, certainly the background is nowhere near white. And the quote-unquote white areas of her clothing is nowhere near white. So later, of course, I work my way up to white. But I tried to stay away from it for as long as I can and make use of the middle tones as much as I can so that the whites really have extra punch. Okay. Alright, so hopefully that answered some of your questions. If you guys found this useful, you know, let me know. Best of luck to you, and hopefully that kind of helps you when how to move from a monochromatic grayscale underpainting to a full color image.